Welcome to today's PreventConnect Resonance Network web conference, Experimenting, Learning, and Moving to a World Without Violence, an Introduction to Resonance Network. And I'm really excited to be able to be here. I'm David Lee from PreventConnect, and I am joined and the objective of today's sessions is to be able to describe Resonance Network and the impact of storytelling and art on creating thriving, just, and accountable communities, to identify examples of intersectional organizing that interrupt root causes, conditions, and institutions of violence, and discuss opportunities for connection and collective action. I'm really thrilled to be able to work with our facilitator and my co-host today, and my good friend Alexis Flanagan, who is the co-director of the Resonance Network, and who uses the pronouns she, her, hers. I use the pronouns he, him, his. Hi, Alexis. How are you doing today?
Hi, David. I'm fantastic. Thank you. It's so good to be here with you.
Well, great. I've had the opportunity to know Alexis through being movement makers with Move to End Violence and with Resonance Network, and it's just a real honor to have who's doing such exciting work, and we're going to be co-hosting this series together, and so I'm really looking forward to how much fun we're going to have. For today's discussion, we have awesome guests who have really great ideas to share, and so I want to just introduce our guests today. We have Christine Davidson, who is the Business and Development Specialist at the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. Hi, Christine.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
It's such a joy to be here on this web conference with you, with Christine, and Christine uses she, they, and them as for her and their pronouns. So, Christine, it's such a pleasure to have you here to share today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is my first time on this platform, so this is pretty exciting. Thank you for having me.
Great. I'm also really thrilled that we have Raven Dickerson, who's the Chief Program Officer for the Domestic Violence Services Shelter Home over in Virginia. Hi, Raven.
Hi, David, and hi, everyone.
It's great. Raven uses she, her, and hers as her pronouns, and I'm really really looking forward to having you talking about the work that you're doing in Virginia, working in your community and in Virginia to really create change locally and statewide.
Thank you. I'm excited to learn from others as well.
Great. And we also are joined by Janae Taylor, who's the creative director and founder of Gilda Purpose Collective and the co-founder of the DMV Bailout. Hi, Janae.
Hey, everybody. This is Janae. Hi.
It's so great to have you join us. Janae uses the pronouns she, her, and hers. So thank you all for being here, and everyone's going to get a chance to hear from all of them. We have 159 other people joining us from all around the country. Thank you for going ahead and writing down where you are. I see many of you have multiple people. We've got people from all around the country. The weather on the whole seems to be pretty warm. I know it's humid in Texas, but it's sunny. I'm here in Oakland, California, where it is sunny and delightful, and great to see so many people joining us from all around the country. Thank you so much today. So with this, I want to start with the audience, because there's all of you from the audience. I want to hear from you all. What does a world without violence look like? Go ahead and write in the text chat. What does a world of violence look like for you? This is an important question for us. We've often talked about what we work against, but what Resonance Network is about is what we're working for. And so I'd love to hear. So people are writing, and so let's go ahead and see what we're hearing. Utopia. I love that right at the beginning. Equitable. Productive and healthy society, no fear, calm, happy, respectful and kind, a world where people feel free and safe from harm, equality, loving, victim blaming will not exist, everyone feels valued, social justice, pervasive kindness, equitable, healthy and equal, fearless, collaborative, equitable, and opportunity. We're going to get to fearless. That's really great. Egalitarian, empathetic, and equal. People feeling safe. Imperialism is ended. Happy, healthy families. People feeling safe. So Alexis, I'm just reading these. It's kind of what this vision is of what this world without without violence. It's one where everyone can assume that they'll be safe and affirmed within society, and that assumption is fulfilled, and labels are gone. And yeah, someone's calling for that says a female president, and black trans women will live with safety and dignity. So, Alexis, when you hear these, what do you think of when you hear what our audience is saying about what a world without violence looks like?
Oh, David, I feel like I woke up this morning and I landed in the right place. This is so exciting to see people animating a vision. That it's a clear vision. It's a collective vision of what can be possible. I'm super excited. I'm very excited to be here, to see so many people who are interested in this conversation and figuring out what it means to orient towards what we're for and to organize and to create that. And this is the world. This is the world that folks in Resonance Network believe is possible and are working for. So I'm so happy to see so many people sharing that vision.
Right, so I see freedom for all of us. Everyone has what they need. No poverty. Systems of oppression are dismantled. Leaders talk about how to help instead of how to divide. And so this just so is aligned with the work. And to me it's so important because it's about a vision of what we want and not just what we don't want. And so there's so many bad things that we don't want, but until we know what we want, we're not going to be able to get there. So thank you all and go ahead and keep on doing it. It's really great to have all that. And so, Alexis, why don't you talk about what Resonance Network is, and let's hear, describe what Resonance Network is, because I think this is something that's been new to many people who are on today's web conference.
Yes, thank you very much for that, the opportunity to talk about this, David. Resonance Network is a network of people who are connected by a particular purpose. And that purpose is to imagine and practice what's possible and necessary to transition and to transform a culture of violence to interdependence and worthiness and thriving. As a network, we have our origin and our roots where we met, David, in Move to End Violence, which is a capacity building leadership program of the Novo Foundation. And after the work of the first cohort and building with subsequent cohorts after that, wanted to build a network to connect folks who are orienting around a bold vision of the world that we want to create where we have transformed violence. And the purpose, to imagine and practice. So imagine, because we have to be able to see what it is that we want to live into, and to see it with texture, to see it with specificity, to see it with like all of the dimension where we aren't leaving any of our people behind, to see what the guests have named today in this text chat. In order to get here, in order to get to the place beyond dismantling systems of oppression and actually creating and building what we want, we have to be able to imagine it, and that's our work. And that helps us to get to a bold, specific vision. It helps us to get to a collective vision. It helps us to get to an expansive vision. And it also calls us to be able to practice what it takes to get there. One thing is to see the vision. The other thing is to be who it requires us to be as people, to live into that vision and to move from where we are now to move into that vision. And we believe it's possible. So we're practicing what's possible and necessary. You know, sometimes folks talk about this work as utopian work, and we kind of hold it as sometimes utopian feels intangible and feels improbable to me, but we view it as evolution. Like, we can become something other. We can have a relationship that is different than the relationship that we currently have with to a culture of violence. And so we're holding a vision of what is possible. We are practicing what's possible and what's necessary, because what's true is that if we don't figure out how to transition and how to transform like, we're going to wipe ourselves out. We're going to wipe ourselves out, and the planet might just be very happy to see us gone. So to practice what's possible and what's necessary to transform a culture of violence. Culture because, you know, whether we see it all the time or not, we participate in creating the conditions for violence. We've been socialized to participate in creating the conditions that allow violence to exist and to allow violence to thrive. And we have to be practicing into a bold vision in order to interrupt that and to instead be grounded in a value of interdependence, and interdependence because my liberation is tied up with your liberation. If you're not free, I'm not free. If your well-being isn't at center and attended to, then we haven't done what it is that we need to do to be humans on this planet together. That's grounded in a value of worthiness, where all of us have inherent worthiness and none of us is disposable. To interrupt a culture of violence where we get to throw people away and where people are disposable, and some people have more value than others. And we want to transition to a world where, based on the inherent worthiness that is essential to all of us, that we all get to thrive, not just some of us, but that we all get to thrive. And so Resonance Network is a network of individuals, of communities, of people who see themselves within this bold vision and see it as their work to be actively envisioning and actively practicing the bringing about of some of the ways that we talk about this interdependence and worthiness and thriving is as a different worldview that's emerging, that's counter to this dominant worldview that is causing so much harm to people and to the planet. So the network is made up of movement folks, of activists, of community organizers, but it's also made up of communities and community members, sister circles and friends, neighbors. It's made up of policy analysts and preventionists. It's made up of artists. It's made up of healers. It's made up of spiritual leaders who see this work of rolling up our sleeves and working hard to bring this vision into reality as their purpose. And we do that in a couple of ways. So we engage folks in the network. First, in practices of creating art and telling stories to make this vision of the world that we deserve, the world where we have transformed violence in meaningful ways that don't, assume that somehow conflict is going to go away or that somehow we are, no longer going to be human beings and that harm will not happen, but to imagine a way that we can be together so that we can move with those things and move through those things in a way where violence doesn't have to be seen as inevitable in our lives. So we ask people to engage in practices that, as adults, we tend to get further and further away from, creating art, telling our stories together, to orient and to make this vision like compelling for people compelling enough and to have enough people lifting up this vision so that it becomes irresistible and folks feel excited and animated to want to organize around what we're for. And we also support the growth and connectivity between beloved communities. So folks who have defined what community means for themselves and have committed to what Dr. King meant when he talked about beloved community. Like how do we struggle together? How do we grow together? How do we evolve as humans in our relationships and in our practices and in our governance together? So that we are learning and so that we're experimenting, so that we're healing together, so that we're developing more leaders who are coming behind us, who are socialized into a way of being that's going to allow us to thrive. It's going to be rooted in those things that interrupt the roots of violence instead of perpetuating the roots of violence. And through the connections that happen between those communities and, you know, between the beloved communities that we're connecting across the country and beyond, we're building power. We're building power to be able to take collective action together to replace the systems of oppression and violence with policies, with practices that center equity and justice, and that will sustain us and sustain the possibility of an emerging worldview manifesting and taking us to where we need to be, so that violence is not an inevitable part of our lives.
Well, you know, Resonance Network, I think of it, Alexis, as just, you know, it's bringing together so much in these different activities and doing it. And can you just describe why the name Resonance and what that means? Because I think it's a really powerful piece.
Oh, thank you for asking that question. So when I think about resonance, even if you look at our logo has sound waves in there. And so, you know, one thing is to hear lots of different sounds. Another is to, like, feel the vibration of that place where there's something in me that recognizes something in you. And when those two things come together, what is produced is even more powerful than what either one of those sounds would have been by itself. And so when we think about resonance and we think about, like, who is a part of resonance, when we're lifting up this vision and when we're talking about what we want to build together and how we want to practice and grow together, there are folks who are just like, oh, yes, like, I feel that. Like, I feel that resonates with something within me. And so if that resonates with something that is within you, then our invitation to you is to consider yourself a part of who we are and join us. Join us in this organizing to build a powerful systems shifting network that transforms the roots of violence and makes possible another world that we're holding hope for in our core.
Well, thank you. So Alexis, let's go to the audience. And let's ask our audience, why is it useful to be in a community of people with a common vision? We're all the people here are people that are committed to being able to make change. But why is it more useful for us to be in a community of people with a common vision? So I want to just hear from all of you about, I love the first answer, to get things done. To be able to merge realities, for support, strength in numbers, synergy, shared resources. We are stronger together. Work together to end goal. To have hope, encouragement, and sustained hope. Oh, that's an interesting theme. To have a common purpose and gain a sense of community. Go ahead and keep on writing in. Why is it useful to be in a community of people with a common vision? Because what Resonance Network is forming a network of people around the country with a common vision. It's a diverse populations with a common goal can move more on creating that goal. Working towards a common vision where you can leverage resources and prevent conflicting or counterproductive activities. Able to share individualistic, to change from an individualistic society to a communal society, to be able to gain partnerships to help all, better chance of success, strength and unity. I'm just seeing a lot of unity and together, and prevent burnout. That support by supporting each other, knowing the end goal, feeling okay when someone needs to be able to step back for self-care. So boy, Alexis, when I'm reading this, it's just I'm seeing people really find great value of how not only can we get done, but we actually take care of each other, and we're able to leverage and be able to complement each other to get where we want to go, so we can be able to actually create the critical mass to shift systems and norms, and be able to find ways to be able to fight about the ways that imperialism lives in us and be able to do this in a transformative way. So, Alexis, you're hearing a lot of people that are seeing how they can be, it's really important, not just useful, it's really vital to be in a community of people with a common vision. What do you think, Alexis?
I agree. I agree that it's vital to be in a common vision. It's vital to be able to hold a particular part of the vision and to see that as a collective responsibility, a responsibility to ourselves and maybe to like our particular spheres of influence in community and relationship, but that those parts of the visions or those sections of vision are connected to a larger vision. And so this concept of interconnection is at the center of the network, that there's interdependence, that we need each other, and I need the part of the vision that you can see that I might not see so clearly. And so to be able to have a common vision, to be able to create that common vision collectively and collaboratively from different perspectives is powerful and it's necessary, and that's why Resonance is here. We're here to support us who are holding this vision, like in our hearts and in our work and in our communities, to know that each other is out here, that we're not by ourselves, to be able to find each other and to connect and to build.
Okay. And we're going to be, of course, sharing how people can be able to join Resonance Network, and you can, of course, just going to their website is the way to do that. But we're going to now illustrate with our guests some examples of some of the work that people are doing that's been part of this Resonance Network, and to get some inspiration. And I think people always love getting a chance to hear stories. So we're going to start with back to Christine Davidson. And so, Christine, why don't you take it from here and share some of the work and what you've been doing, and love to be able to hear from you. So I'm going to hand the podium to you, Christine.
All right. How's the volume of my voice? Is it okay?
Perfect.
All right. Well, first I'm going to do my traditional protocol, which is greeting you all in my language. I'm Anishinaabe, and it's important for me to do this. So bonjour and dinawe maganiduk. Hello, my relatives across this country. Kiwatayashik Indigo. My Indian name is Kiwatayashik, which means something that goes around and stirs things out, which I think is pretty fitting that the woman who gave me that name when I was a young child probably knew I was going to be up to something when I grew up. So I really appreciate that. Magizian Dodem, I'm Eagle Clan, Gawa Babaganika, Gishkonigan, and Donjiba. I'm from the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. Christine Davidson Jaganashimung is my English name, and I'm with the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition. I was also in Move to End Violence with many of you in this community, so I'm really grateful for that family and support that I get to do this work in this way. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm also a survivor of long-term child sexual abuse from a medicine man, which really drives my will and tenacity and determination to continue to do this work, because I recognize the sort of full picture of how oppression and violence and racism and all these things came to pass in our world, and to hold the truth that we're all human beings and we all have value and reason and purpose and place, and how do we hold those truths simultaneously. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk a bit about the experimentation that we're doing within our organization and within my community here on this reservation, and thinking about how we bring our whole selves to this work, right? Let me see if I can click to. So I'm pretty sure folks are pretty familiar with the medicine wheel concept, right? I mean, this is something that is global. It's, forever. I have some photos here. There's the Senegambian stone circles in West Africa, the Oyu stone circles in Japan, Stonehenge. And, folks may be familiar with the medicine wheel concept here on this continent, indigenous people on this continent. So, I just wanted to show this slide to get us to kind of be thinking about how our interconnectedness is global, but it's also generational in terms of like there's where we're standing right here today, there's 7 generations behind us and 7 generations in front of us. And just to sort of place ourselves on that pivot point, and what do we do with this time in our lives, with these choices that we have the ability to make, the community that we choose to be in, and then sometimes we don't have choices in the community that we're in, right? The work containers that we're in can be supportive of who we are, and sometimes they're not supportive, right? And so how do we cultivate a new way of being, whether we have a supportive work container or not? How do we support this new way of being? How do we cultivate this new way of being, whether we have a family or a community who supports this new way of being? And I think because we all have a very specific role in the big ecosystem, right? Not just with ending violence and oppression and patriarchy and anti-Blackness and Indigenous invisibility, but we also have like a very spiritual role in protecting our water and air and earth for the generations coming after us, right? And so none of these things can be thought of without the intersectionality of the whole thing. And so I think that it's hard for my brain to wrap it around it and talk about it in a way that is very simple, because it's complex, and we also know that it is really simple, right? And so let me see. I guess I want to say that our interconnectedness is something that we have to cultivate, right? And then let me see if I can move this. So this medicine wheel idea is really about thinking about the cycle of everything, right? So we have the 4 directions. We have east, south, west, north. We have fire, earth, water, wind, air, spring, summer, fall, winter. We have babies to youth, to adults, to elders. And we also have cycles in terms of like how we cultivate in a work environment or in a family environment or in a societal environment, right? And there's teachings that go with all of these things, but really it's this idea that we can move through the cycle of things if we put energy and focus onto it. And how do we do that? And it's not easy to do, right? I think we're kind of socially conditioned. Alexis, you were talking about this earlier, how we're kind of socially conditioned to be in silos. Our work environment puts us in silos. Our funding could put us in silos, like the difference between church and state, even by our policies around professionalism, right? Like a lot of our work environments have very strict policies on how we conduct ourselves in our work environment. But if you think about being in community with one another, authentic community with one another, what does that look like? And these are some of the things that we have been exploring within our organization and within my community, right? How do we dismantle those silos? How do we bring our whole selves to this work and transform the work container, right? Pushing the button here, there we go. So the way that we kind of think about our interconnectedness is like the web of life, right? So there's the individual and ourselves, there's our family, there's our community, there's society, and then there's the entire web of life. And I think what's important for us to remember is that all of these things cannot happen without the other, right? If we don't have clean water to drink and air to breathe, then our world is just going to fall apart. And how do we hold that? Oh my goodness. All right, going to keep on going here. So one of the things I did want to add about the web of life is that when one thread is pulled on the web of life, everything, the whole web moves, right? So part of the things we're thinking about is even for those who are causing harm, they are still a thread in the web of life, And how do we hold those truths simultaneously so we can work for the liberation of all of us, right? And it's part intervention, because there's harm that continues to be happening, and there's also prevention, but there's also seeing each person for their contribution to the whole, and what does that look like, and how are we're exploring it is through the community of practice for spiritual midwifery. This was something that was, the spiritual midwifery has been supported by residents. It's 3 convenings, and a group of us we got together and we just started having some deep conversations, exploring our intersections, exploring what it looks like to bring our whole selves, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual selves, to the work, and how do we work from abundant overflow, right? And so, because we're in a culture of kind of do more and do even more, and then we end up in a state of depletion, right? Like the things that we're talking about, to be in a world free of violence, it can be pretty exhausting because the system is set up to continue to challenge that, right? And you'll be hearing from some others who are doing amazing work in that regard as well. But what does it mean to let our spirit drive our work, right? And also, one of the questions that we really dug in on is, why do we hide in plain sight to do spirit-driven work? And how can we think differently about that? So this is a photo of some of the art pieces that we used to think about what we each bring to the work. And as you can see, it's very, very diverse, what we all kind of created there, right? But what it did was it tapped into a different side of our brain and our spirit, and to really think about what our contribution is to the whole, right? And so some of the things that we're thinking about is, like, how do we shift our personal framework, the artificial silos that we've been placed into for whatever reason? How do we shift our organizational framework? You know, part of our organizational framework is about spaciousness, right? Like, we all have our grant deliverables and the things that we do, or we all have personal responsibility in whatever we're doing with our families, with whatever job that we're in. And how do we have spaciousness and support from our team members in that regard, right? And then how do we shift a movement framework and a societal framework, which means doing work with folks that we're not familiar with, that we have to learn to understand where they're coming from, what their needs are, and how do we continue to grow those spaces where this can thrive. And I think that's just a community of practice that we're exploring right now, and we're trying to deepen it and slow things down and make room for all the things that we've kind of been talking about already.
Christine, this is David, and it's great hearing about how, with the resident support, the spiritual midwifery community of practices get a chance for you to be able to reflect and learn from each other and really strengthen how you're making an impact in your communities.
Yeah, it's tough, really, to talk about it. It's unfamiliar. I guess it's not unfamiliar, but it's hard to talk about it in a short amount of time, right? It's really deep work. It's actually very spiritual work. And so, you know, I just would offer folks that open invitation to explore what that looks like, to think about bringing your whole selves to the work.
You know, that's so important, Christine, because sometimes we get caught up in our, you know, what our funder says to do, and what we need to do is bring our whole selves. And so let's go to the audience, actually, and talk about that. What's something you could what's one thing that you could do to bring your whole self to a collective effort to transform violence? So I want to hear from our audience. What do you think you can do to bring your whole self to a collective effort to transform violence? And just so we're thinking about the whole self, I'm going to go back to Christine, the medicine wheel you presented, of thinking about all of these different elements of ourselves. So go ahead and write I'd like to hear from you all in the text chat. What's one thing you can do to bring your whole self to a collective effort to transform violence? Because Christine, I think it's really, what you're really talking about is exciting to think about what it does to be able to do that. So it's interesting seeing people are writing away. So to be transparent, to be more intentional in all aspects of my life. I'm considering public synchronized prayer and meditation, practice self-care, commit to mindfulness, to forgive. I work to be fully human as an evaluator, not to be disconnected from the subject, to think about bringing our whole self at the end of the day, for the agency who just sees us as employees, focus on mindful about everything we do, to do things with purpose, living with empathy, acknowledge my role as both a survivor and someone who has caused harm. People are just writing, and it's hard for me to even keep up with everyone that's writing. Start therapy, to apologize, recognizing our biases, forgiveness to self and others, to be empathetic and authentic, to work in service to the collective.
Yeah. David, I do think one of the things that's so important is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Society has divided us very intentionally. That's what oppression and violence is, and that's how, power is maintained. And so be comfortable with being uncomfortable and be transparent about what you don't know, and that you're coming in a humble way to understand one another, right? And I think that sometimes we're really good at it, and also sometimes we're not, but also organizations have a really big role in supporting environments that is possible, right? To learn about things that you don't know anything about and keep working at it, right?
Right. So Alexis, as you're looking at this text chat and hearing this in the conversation and Christine's pieces, this really is an integral part of what Resonance Network is about.
This is an integral part of what it's about, and that so many ideas are coming forward and so many specific examples are coming forward about what to do differently. David and Christine, it just really drives home for me that we've been socialized, and systems of oppression do this to us, right? To disconnect ourselves from source, that we have to compartmentalize ourselves, and actually, that's violent. That's violent to ourselves. It's violent to our spirit. That we have to show up as parts of ourselves, and that we can't show up completely and fully as ourselves. And the participants who are in the chat are naming and calling forth, no, actually, this is what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to be integrated. Some of the practices that are being called forth just remind me that, our transformation, and what you're talking about, Christine, when we're thinking about, in movement space, how do we hold the possibility for people to reconnect with spirit, or however people define spirit, however people define source, their true essence, the whole and the core of who we are. How does that become a part of our work? Because it is a pathway to interrupt violence and to transform violence. That transformation is, when we think about it on the societal level, it also is an individual level. It starts with us individually connecting and reconnecting and being willing to practice with each other. Christine, you know, offering your people's medicine, right, in the form of a medicine wheel on this webinar is a practice that is norm shifting. It's saying, no, actually, I'm not going to keep that part of me, that central teaching that has been so important to me, you know, just for a specific isolated space. Like, no, if that's a part of me, I bring that with me, and that informs how I do this work to transform violence. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, that's right, Alexis. That medicine wheel there's so much to talk about with it. I encourage everybody to Google it and look up more or seek out older folks in your community that may have some ideas around this idea of balance, right? Like if you were leaving, like if you think about it in terms of like physical exercise, and if you don't do physical exercise, you know that your body is out of balance, right? Or you know that if you ran 40 miles a day, 7 days a week, you would be out of balance physically. It's the same idea with our spirituality or our mental health or our emotional well-being, our ability to learn and absorb and synthesize information. If those things are out of balance, it throws everything off, and it lessens our ability to be whole ourselves and then be in community with others. And so it really is about seeking balance and understanding our interconnectedness and that continuity across all things.
Well, thank you, Christine, so much. And you're going to stay on because we're going to be able to come back to you. But I really want to come next to our next guest, Raven Dickerson. And Raven, talk about some of the work that through Resonance that you're doing, and hear a different, connected but a different piece. So, Raven, I'd love to hear you describing the work that you're doing in Virginia.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And hi to everyone. I'm really grateful to be on this call or webinar with you all today. And I've already learned so much, and so the notes that I had about what I was going to talk about have shifted, such is the way of our life. So I work at an agency called Shelter House, and we are a member of the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, which is our statewide coalition for domestic and sexual violence agencies. And in that, I get to support the Action Alliance and align with them and grow with them as a part of their team. And so over the past, what feels like 2 years, there's been shifts and pivots into reimagining our work. And so many of the things that I have on the slides are things that were mentioned by Alexis and Christine, and so I'll just align with them in that as well. And then there are other things that I want to share out of the excitement of what's happening in Virginia. So some things to talk about are the infinity of possibilities that came from connecting with Resonance Network and beginning to do this work as a coalition, a statewide coalition for sexual and domestic violence agencies. There was a need for white leadership to shift into new possibilities that separated them from the normality of how white supremacy functions in spaces. And so that brought in an opportunity to see a different field to work with and to see a new horizon. It's something that we'd always been working towards as we talk about the end of domestic and sexual violence, or as we talk about creating more beloved communities. But when leadership began to work within themselves, and as Christine was talking about, bringing our whole selves into our spaces, an infinity of possibilities came up because alignment happened. And when I think as I've been involved with Resonance Network and I've been around wonderful people that show me new ways to grow, I recognize that alignment, when it's collective, it brings a new source of energy that we can draw from and that we can practice with. It feels tangible. And so when Alexis said earlier that there's an opportunity to practice being who we are required to be in order to seek out this vision of a new world, that's a part of the work that's happening in Virginia. We are collectively working in this one-to-one space. So as I am as a queer woman of color, I present in a way that transforms myself to transform other people. And we're diving into this space, that spaciousness that says that we need more transformative interactions instead of transactional interactions, where I'm seeking out you for the meeting of a personal need, but we're diving into a collective need. And so part of what makes this possible for us is to embrace the spaciousness and dualities. And that means it's going to hurt. So I'm a practicing doula for abortion, birth, postpartum, and death. And in that, part of my role is to kind of see on the horizon where we're going to encounter something that's uncomfortable, or we're going to encounter something that is painful for us to shed. And at the same time, recognize that there's going to be reward and comfort for it. And there's enough space for all of that. So we welcome the idea that by shifting and pivoting and going to a different depth, we are going to find ourselves uncomfortable. Speaking again to what Christine says, we're going to welcome that into this space. And in that spaciousness, it's been, for me, a challenge to look at my own habits and practices and to respond to that invitation for awareness, right? So the habits are the things that we're doing that are unconscious, and replacing those things with practices, something that's intentional, something that I can find myself immersing into rather than blindly committing myself to. And in that, we're also recognizing that this is a cycle of new depth for us. So some things that people may need to hear is, again, recognizing that it's going to be uncomfortable, there's going to be reward, but also when we imagine ourselves as working within a cycle, that we're coming into a new depth, but also in a position that we may have been in before. So if you imagine a slinky and you just hold a slinky up and you allow it to fall to the floor and it bounces, right? If you put a washer onto a slinky, it's going to continue to revolve, and it may be in the same position as it was when it was higher up, but it's at a different depth. That depth coming is uncomfortable. That's a reality that we have to deal with. Other things to imagine, again, is beloved community. And I also just like to think about how people in the South say beloved and people say beloved. I can't even imagine that on my mouth. I say beloved. So within beloved community, we choose all of us. But even in choosing all of us, there's a reality that we shift into of choosing the last of us. So who are the last people to be called in? And how do we bring those people in first? How do we center right there in that choice of those of us who are not going to make it to liberation before those of us who are way more privileged? How do we center right with them? That statewide alignment becomes much more manageable when we think about small movements such as choosing the last of us, which is also choosing all of us, right? And so the illustrations here of the elephants and even the one before were pulled from and the actual story that we began collecting around the state. So we moved around the state for a few months, and we had membership meetings where we asked these questions very similar to what you all responded to in the chat box of what does it take to live in a world without violence? What are the conditions that need to be created? And out of those, we began to have conversations around beloved community. There are other ones that come up, interconnectedness, self-governance, and those are all pictured there. But there was a new illustration for us in our attempt to become aligned across the state, and that was a commitment to shifting and pivoting rather than racing forward. So I myself am someone who, I'm a Leo, which means a lot of things. I have more humility than most Leos, but one of the things is that we are eager to move forward and to be urgent and to just take it by, take as much as we can and get as far as we can. And shifting and pivoting is a really small practice. It's small practice and it's small movement, and it's also repetitive. So in this work, there's a call to consistency that we don't see outside of the normality of white supremacy. Right? There's a call to continue making making new possibilities and realities out of what is small and tangible and repeatable. And those shifts and pivots get us to a place where we're far more connected than we were. And as a coalition of member agencies across the state who are providing critical domestic and sexual violence services to survivors, to families of survivors, and also bringing in the services that are necessary to those at harm, we have to think about, what about our funders, right? I think that was mentioned, like, oh, what about the things that we are committed to doing in our grants and our contracts? How do those things keep us connected when we have to embrace the reality that white supremacy brings around, which is scarcity? And how out of scarcity do we shift and pivot into abundance? I am really comfortable in saying I actually don't have those answers today, but it's a question that we continue to pose to ourselves and to think about who amongst us is coming with us, and how is it that we create a world that can be recycled, right? That can be continuously recreated out of a very different imagination. So even in that, thinking about our funders, we have to sit with the reality that Adrienne Marie Brown poses in the Emergent Strategy about inch-wide, mile-deep relationships. And that if we are committing to ourselves, right, if we're accepting that call and that invitation to consistency, and if we're shifting and pivoting and we welcome ourselves to the awareness that comes to looking at our habits and practices, we'll find that our movement actually shrinks and grows deeper. And so it's just about, even in that same space of being the washer on the slinky, as you cycle down into a different depth. We collectively get to do that together. And so part of our experience with the Residence Network is that we had a 3-day experience where Alexis and Nan came out to the beautiful capital of Virginia in Richmond, and at the Action Alliance office, and a few people from many places across the state, from many different experiences, and many different identities set, and we talked about so much that it blew my mind. But one of those things that I hold with me are the minimums. So what can we uphold, and what can uphold us, and how do we not pile onto our work? And so I heard, I can't remember if it was Christine or Alexis, but I heard one of those wonderful people talk about cultivating interconnectedness. And again, that's a practice that comes from the work that we get to do together. And so I imagine, in addition to this beautiful illustration of the bumblebees and the honeycomb, I think about the ant and how small and mighty the ant is, and how a group of ants can lift a whole lollipop and walk away with it. And how can that be reciprocal to our work? What is the lift that has to happen, and how can we embrace small movement to create that critical mass, to move something as small, to move as small as an ant to something as large as a lollipop. And it's also really unfortunate that there's a lollipop on the floor. I think about that too. So again, another side of self-governance, and one of our favorite pictures that is within our story. But I mentioned who stays and who goes. So in this reality that we get to reimagine and that we get to recreate, how do we choose all of us, center on choosing the last of us, and continue with movement, and continue with action, and continue with creativity and energy? How do we accept that there have to be small sparks of change in order to shift and to pivot? I think that for us, it's to look at this nonlinear space, and to say that it's not, I was first here and then I was there, and because I was there, I then moved here. But it's again to think about the cycle of depth, and that if we, on this one-to-one scale, if I for myself can transform, then I can transform the environment around me, and that those who do not choose to come with us are still within that environment. They're still within this radical reimagination of the world that we want to live in. And so it's accepting that as we continue to move forward, people are at a different depth, at a different position, and at some point they'll cycle down, because the critical mass that we create, that we choose to believe in, and that we choose to practice, and we accept the call to consistency in, that will create a reality that others have to live in. they can choose to live in with us. And in that, we have energy, and we can inch forward in really small, sparkling ways. So where we are now and what's possible now because of the new depth that we're in is that we get to reimagine our work in really radical ways, that we get to shed ourselves from the functions of white supremacy that push forward perfectionism and push forward paternalism and push forward urgency and the expectancy to be comfortable. And when we disconnect ourselves from that, when we separate ourselves from that reality and reimagine something that is liberating for all of us, we find that we are closer together. We find that we actually need each other to survive, and we need each other to create the conditions that will then bring us to the horizon. And so one of my favorite things to say is to FUBU things. If you are not a child of the 90s as I am and don't recall the FUBU movement, it is fashion that was for us by us. And so we're looking at the last of us to create the conditions for all of us. And we're FUBUing things in a very, very radical way. And so this was, again, going back to that beginning part of the space where white leadership at the Action Alliance had to individually shift and had to move from allyship into alignment. Because I believe that as we talk about allyship as a new norm, it becomes performative, and it breaks away from the reality of being in alignment with people. And so we saw that shift happen from allyship into an alignment, and we began to see the realities of work that looked for us and by us. And so something tangible that comes from that small shift is this critical collective strategy and language for the Action Alliance that begins to almost leak itself out into the state of Virginia. And so for those of us who are not employed by the Action Alliance or partner with the Action Alliance, and we go home into our communities, we get to speak the same language. And that is, again, the illustration of the ant, of collective ants, small people in small ways, making small change that is critical for the entire state. So the Action Alliance now has a new visioning document, visioning and values document that commits itself to the elimination of injustices around gender, economics, racial injustices, and reproductive justices. And that language that comes is defined and is made tangible for all people. And so the last thing that I get excited to share about is through critical inquiry, thinking about new outcomes. Right, when we divest from funders, either in mindset, in practice, or literally divestment from financially, we get again to do the choosing of the last of us. We get to create work that is for us and by us. And then we get to think about this question of what does it look like for bravery to be an outcome? Like, what does it look like for boldness to be an outcome, rather than the outcomes that are commonly on our work plans, such as so-and-so case manager will meet with so-and-so many clients to bring about families that are well-functioning. That normality that we're currently experiencing is different for us, because we want to think about what it means to be bold. And so a practice for us, some of us who gather at the Action Alliance in our meetings, we end with, what is one bold thing that we're going to do as a result of this gathering together, as a result of this fellowship, as a result of this collective experience? What's one bold thing that we're going to do? We're going to take that back into our various communities across the state, and then we're going to bring back the action and the result of that. We commit ourselves, right? It's that call to consistency that's powerful. And that last part about what does it look like for there to be brave outcomes. So even in our strategic planning that is coming up over the year, how can we commit to bravery? How can we accept the invitation to be brave? And all of this is possible because we recognize that we have to do transformative work individually that then affects the larger experience of being in Virginia. That was a collection of all of my thoughts.
Thank you for that, Raven. I get so excited when every time I hear you mention bravery as an outcome. You know, to transform and to leap forward into the evolution of like cultural and social norms that allow all of us to thrive. Like we have to take big leaps. And you know, being able to like figure out how do we even show that? How do we measure, and how do we document, and how do we show up and learn from and help support others to take those big leaps from a place of bravery is inspiring, and it gets me really excited. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I think it's an exciting comment or just idea to embrace and to shift into a reality that has that language rather than the language of holding on to norms.
Yeah. It's the language of innovation. You know, we talk about our work. Like one of our core practices is experimenting. You know, we don't approach the work from the assumption that we actually know what it's going to take in order to be able to thrive in this in an emerging worldview where interdependence and worthiness is centered. But what we have to do is to be willing to try something that goes beyond what we've always done, and that requires bravery, and that requires risk taking. And that's the stuff that innovation is made of. It's how we shape, it's how we change the movement through those like small incremental shifts and pivots, like you said, and building enough steam in those incremental shifts and pivots that gives us enough momentum to take big leaps together. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing how that's happening in Virginia.
Let's move to the audience now, and I'd love just to hear, as we're talking about this, what are the risks that need to be taken to cultivate innovation? What is it going to take to be able to take the risks? Raven shared about some of the risks that have been taking the Virginia Action Alliance, so I'd love to hear from you all, and we're not going to take too much time because I want to make sure we have time for Janae to be able to talk about it, but love to hear some of the people's thoughts about what are the risks that we need to be able to take to cultivate innovation. To build this world without violence is going to take a lot of innovation. And so we have to talk you know, about this honestly. We have to be in solidarity. We have to have leadership needs to step back. White leadership needs to step back. That we need to be brave with the people and communities and challenge the norms of inequality. We need to break out of our comfort zone. And so I think it's a great thing. Go ahead and keep on writing about what does it take, what are those risks. I love the notion of that, what if bravery were the outcome that we're trying to be able to do, and what brave we can do. We need to risk failure. We need to be able to think about where our funding comes from. We need to improve health equity. We need to, for those of us white, listening, and not thinking we know it all. And then, Christine, I love it. Fund it. And that's part of what Resonance Network is trying to bring people together and find ways to get some of those resources. So I'm given the time, and we're having such a great conversation, I want to get to Janae Taylor, who's going to be able to share just some of the insights of the power of the work that you're doing, Janae. So I want to be able to do this, and then we'll bring it together at the end and talk about what actions people can take. So Janae, I'm going to hand the podium over to you.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody, and please be patient with us as my power just went out. We're in a real world in real time. So I'm looking at the slide, and the first slide I believe that folks should see right now is my face, and then the next one says picture of a puppy in a cage. So I'm going to do this kind of Pechacucha style, and for folks who don't know, that's a Tokyo version of TED Talks, so about 20 seconds per slide, 20 slides, 20 seconds each for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So I'm just going to walk through this thing. Over the last year and a half, for the last year, the question that I've been asking as a member of the Resonance Network and the Innovation Lab is how might we amplify the absurdity of cages, particularly with people who have been impacted by cages and don't call themselves actors. So the first picture you see is a picture of a puppy in a cage. How weird and absurd that might be. Let's go to the next slide. I believe it's some plants in a cage. What would it be like if we just left a plant in a cage? Could that plant live? How long would it stay? Let's go to the next slide. Picture of a baby duck in a cage. Just imagine what it would be like to be a duck in a cage, surrounded by metal, just trying to live your baby life. Next slide. Look at this picture of free-range eggs. Perhaps they'll be born on plush grass, underneath the sky, supported by a community of other chickens or hens with resources met. Next slide. Picture of a toddler inside a playpen. Imagine being a kid just sitting there wondering how did I get stuck in here? Is this where I'm supposed to be? Next slide. How odd it is to have a dog keeping other dogs in cages. Next slide. Here's a picture of fruit in a cage. Now I know we have a block and a time and a little feedback form, a little chat box. So if you could please take this second, looking at this fruit in a cage, how many days do you think this fruit could live in a cage? 5 days, 30 days. These living things that we like to eat, apples, grapes, oranges, bananas, how long could they stay alive in this cage? I'm going to give folks about 10 more seconds to respond.
And we've had people saying 4, 3, 2, 3, 5, many of those days.
Oh, okay, so nothing a week, huh? Okay, let's go to the next picture. We have a picture of a little person in a cage, perhaps being watched by a correctional officer who could be posed as someone else. How long do you think this living thing could stay alive in this cage? Let's give about 10 seconds for that.
And people are writing in.
How many, what do they say?
And be a whole person, not long. I can't fathom that.
Wow. Leaving this little person in the cage for a day or a week wouldn't be the way we want to live. All right, let's go to the next slide. The earth is made up of 70% water. I hope that many of us know that. And we know that we contain water in different ways. We contain water in pools or man-made lakes. And sometimes when we try to contain water, it works in our favor, and other times it does not. Let's go to the next slide. Here in this scenario, we see how the levees broke when water was trying to be contained, and I can only imagine how difficult it must be for this person to row a boat over concrete. Thinking about New Orleans right now as well, after they had a terrible weather and storm yesterday, people's houses are flooded once again. Let's go to the next slide. This is the human body, which is made up of 70% water, just like the world. Next slide. what do we think would happen if we tried to contain water inside of a person the same way we try to contain water in the earth? Next slide. Sometimes humans do it. We actually put ourselves in cages in the ocean surrounded by sharks. Very strange, but it happens. Next slide. We do it in a different way as well. We put our cousins, our friends, our school teachers, people who have not been convicted of anything inside of cages because we think they did something. We perhaps saw them, but they haven't, well, we don't know. Then they too are surrounded by sharks, or rather folks carrying guns. Next slide. This is a young black trans woman who was killed less than a month ago inside of Rikers jail. She had $500 worth her bail, and she couldn't afford that. We also know that Sandra Bland was held for $500, and we never found out what happened to her either. Rest in peace to Laquan. Next slide. After 45 was elected, as a native Washingtonian, I was living in the city. Washington, D.C. goes from the White House 10 miles north, south, east, west. We have 36 different types of police in that very small nucleus. And after 45 was elected, when lots of people were super frustrated and angry, they would come to Washington, D.C., storm the ground, tell the world how angry they are, and leave all of their posters. So my friends and I used a play called Fences by August Wilson to discuss how do we keep each other safe? How do we keep ourselves safe? Fences takes place in the front yard of a family in Pittsburgh after the war. And this play does not let anyone in the house at all. So it made me think about D.C. as also a sanctuary city with 36 types of police. Who did we let in and who did we let out? Next slide. So my friends and I took this play and realized that Washington, D.C. says that it has a no cash bail system, but up to 12% of the people sitting inside a jail do have cash bail. So instead of trying to end money bail, how do we end pretrial detention or end pretrial incarceration? And we use the play as a way to fundraise to bail out black mamas and caregivers for Mother's Day. For the last 3 years, the national bailout based in New York has been comprised of a council of 13 organizations that are black-led across this country, fundraising to bail out black mamas and caregivers for Mother's Day, to reunite them with their families. And there are people in this picture right now that you're looking at who were in cages, and by the use of theater, we were able to fundraise through a play to bail them out so they could be in the play in the fall at the Kennedy Center Stage to Play Festival. You see our friend Ale in the middle with her hand in the air. She was an actor in a play, then detained by ICE for over 60 days, and then we got her out of jail, and she came back to bail out a black mama and then be in a play herself. Next slide. The last slide you'll see is a slide of my partner, Serena, with the sunglasses on, and Kyla with the red fanny pack on, locking themselves down to Durham County Jail for over 8 hours the day after a bailout this year to guarantee that no black mamas and caregivers went into jail. I think it means a lot when we talk about how do we amplify the absurdity of cages, that the same way that we thought this fruit could only stay 4 to 5 days in a cage and live, but yet we call the police on our community members all the time. We think we see something, we heard something, they've done something, and instead of trying to use our own tools to create solutions to violence, we continue to turn to the state, which has been since the beginning of time a lynch mob on black and brown bodies in this country. And so I'm here to help us interrogate, how do we begin to use absurdity or creativity in a way to highlight the toxicity and the very harmful ways that violence continues to be perpetrated on black bodies, on all of our bodies, as we engage police departments to solve everything. What I know from this experiment is that police officers are not detectives, so they don't even solve crimes, and that we continue to increase our police budgets to end violence, where violence continues to rise. Specifically for women, white women are now the highest at risk to end up in jail across the United States. Specifically for immigrants, for folks who don't have citizenship, specifically for mothers and caregivers, and most importantly, trans people. We know that black trans women don't have a life expectancy over 35. And so as we begin to think of strategies, I'm a part of this team called Arm Us, Not Harm Us, which is out here created by TLC, Transgender Law Center, to uplift the Grapevine Report. How do we actually create block-by-block solutions to end violence? And so creative ways may look like creating a Facebook group, or like we did, a Facebook group on your block, so your block can all report if they see something, know something. And some of us also created, by using theater, we have been able to, one, role play our issues, and then two, role play solutions. So I believe that we can amplify the absurdity of cages in more practical and tangible ways. And I hope that this presentation, and that by diving deep into the Resonance Innovation Lab, that you can see that we can innovate solutions and we can create ways to get our people out of cages. And one night, we just did this play and we fundraised $2,000, and we got out 3 people out of cages. People who had not been convicted but have been sitting there for over 30 days waiting for a judge. So dive in. And how might we amplify the absurdity of cages? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to, Janae, that was really powerful. And that was, and in the text chat I already saw, someone quoted you, how do we amplify the absurdity of cages? So I'm going to actually move to the question, and what possibilities arise when we take risks and make the visible absurd, and how we can do that. And Janae, you really are highlighting that. And so I want to just have people think about what happens when we take risks to be able to do this in the example that Janae gave. Alexis, I want to turn to you just now. We don't have time for a group discussion, but just talk about what people can do to get involved, and so we can close the conversation in the next 4 minutes.
Thank you so much, Janae and Christine and Raven. Thank you, David, for having us. These are the conversations, these are the activities that Resonance is supporting and that Resonance is connecting. And if there's anything about this work that interests you, we invite you to join us by visiting resonance-network.org/contact. On the contact form, if you sign up for our mailing list, then you will receive updates about when there are upcoming web conferences. The work that Janae described of exploring that question about how do we amplify the absurdity of cages within a process that we hold called the Innovation Lab, where we surface and we play and develop our skills around innovation and radical imagination and radical doability. So there will be another round of Innovation Lab coming soon. So to get notifications about those kinds of things that are coming up, please sign up for our list. And one of the things that we're doing to build towards collective action is that we're actively conducting an influencer survey. So the influencer survey could be of like elected leadership, it could be of community leadership, organizational leadership. All of you here on this call are influencers. And so what we are doing is we're asking influencers to respond to some of the concepts and some of the components of this bold vision of an emerging worldview where we've transformed violence. So the link that's there on the slide, we ask that you click that link and take the 10 or 15 minutes or so to complete that survey so that we can get a taste of what influencers' appetite is to take action to move us towards the world that we are envisioning. The survey closes tomorrow, so please click that link and make sure you take that survey today. And please stay tuned to the subsequent webinars that we're going to do here with PreventConnect. This webinar was to introduce you to Resonance Network, and the next time we'll be together will be October 3rd. On October 3rd, we're going to talk about a project on creative world building that's centered in Afrofuturism and using fan fiction to tell stories of what this world needs to look like, where we have transformed violence, and the violence particularly as it impacts, as it intersects with gender. So the next version of the Wakanda Dream Labs anthology, Black Freedom Beyond Borders, focuses on reimagining gender. And so we are going to be talking to Wakanda Dream Lab. We'll be talking to some of the artists that are contributing to that. And we'd love to have you join us on October 3rd. Again, sign up. Go.
Yeah, so we are out of time. We got 1 minute left. We want to know what people are going to do right now. What's your next step? Are you going to fill out a survey? Are you going to sign up? Are you going to make boldness an outcome of your work? We'd love to hear from all of you. I want to thank everyone who spoke today to be able to be joining us all. So Alexis with Resonance Network, Christine, Raven, and Janae. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for conversation, but it was great to be able to hear all of you. We'd love to have you sign out with what action you're going to take. I'll keep the chat open, but this is going to be concluding today's Resonance Network PreventConnect web conference. Join us October 3rd. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll be part of this conversation as we're creating a world without violence.